Today I have two topics that I want to talk about, and the first one has to do with the curriculum plan for a school. In the technical sense of a word, a curriculum, in the foundational sense of the word, a curriculum covers all the education that a student receives from the time he starts until he finishes school. Okay? Now, most people that's like the technical sense of the word. Most people don't think of it that way. In fact, many teachers say, I need to grab my curriculum. Okay? Well, what they're talking about is their lesson plan for the day, or the thing, or I need to grab my math curriculum or something. I guess, but in a math curriculum would be all the math education that someone gets from the time they start to the time they finish. It would have that math adjective would be a limiter on what type of curriculum it is. But normally when we say curriculum, we're talking about a teacher saying, they got that big, thick notebook that tells them what to teach each day. That's not a curriculum in the actual sense of the word. That's just an easy word to use when they're referring to that. It might be better, more accurate to say, I need to grab my lesson plans or something like that. But either way. So we're going to talk about curriculum and what should be in a curriculum. And basically, I want to just mention the subjects and talk through and think through with you what subjects should be included in a high school, or 7th through 12th. That's my frame of reference when I say high school. I know more and more I kind of think middle school is an appropriate division, because older elementary are way different than younger elementary, but they're nothing like high schoolers. There's like a middle section there. But a lot of schools still have, especially Christian smaller schools, will have like elementary and high school. That's what we do. So I'm thinking 7th through 12th grade when I'm thinking about that section in the curriculum. But before we talk through what should be in a curriculum, let's talk about publishers. Because most of us, when we think about a curriculum, are thinking, I don't need to make that decision. Okay? Even if you're thinking if you have this faint idea, or you acknowledge that there might be a faint possibility that you would be the administrator of a school, you're not even going to think about what should be in your curriculum. You're going to think about who you should use for your curriculum most of the time. There are lots and lots of different publishers, and I would say that there are definite differences between the publishers. There wouldn't be a lot of different publishers if they were the same, would there? Okay? If I'm Mr. Publisher and somebody else comes along and says, I want to be Mr. Publisher B, people are going to ask, why should I use you when I already have him? And you say, well, you have to be different, right? Why would you even go through the work unless you thought that the way you presented information was better than the way it's than what the present options are? So there are huge differences between, okay, first of all, Christian curriculums are vastly different than secular curriculums. Okay? And so the huge difference, when I say huge differences between Christian curriculums, the huge difference doesn't compare to the difference between a Christian curriculum and a secular curriculum. Okay? But the point I'm saying is, if you're serious about what you want to provide for your children, you're not going to say, well, it's Christian, it's fine. You want it to match the style of learning that you think is the right way to teach your children. So, let me ask you, as a class, each of you, I'd like you to think of, and I asked this to the class way back in September, can you remember or can you tell me publishers that you're familiar with in Christian education? Okay. So everybody, well, almost everybody, would have had some materials from Christian publishers. And if you haven't, you may have heard of them since the time you were in Bible college or just talking about this class. So, everybody should be able to think of at least one. Right?
Are you talking about like Abeka?
Yep, okay. Abeka. You're welcome to say Abeka again, if that's the one you thought of.
Abeka.
Same.
Alpha and Omega.
EJU.
EJU. EJ.
ACE.
ACE. Landmark. Landmark. ACE. Abeka. 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 BJU. Christian Liberty. Christian School of Grenada, right?
Something like that.
Something like that.
Zondervan.
Zondervan, okay.
Both Abeka and Pensacola.
Those are the same. Abeka's from Pensacola.
What's the other one? Yeah.
BJU, yeah. Okay, so,
I'm sorry.
that's acceptable. So, Zondervan is a Christian publisher, but I don't know that they publish any educational materials. But that's understandable. You never went to a Christian. Do you remember any of the publishers of the materials you had in school?
No.
Like Harcourt and Brace or HarperCollins or anything like that? I'm sure those are some publishers that you had. Those are secular educational publishers. Yes?
I was going to say Zondervan does print material. I used it last semester for Hebrew class. They have a textbook and everything.
Yes, for college academic type stuff. Hebrew text, for sure, yes. But I don't think they're into the elementary and secondary school curriculum publishing. They might be. So, can anybody remember or give kind of what makes the one that you chose, what do you remember about the one that you chose? And if you had something else, can you contrast it from something, with another type of teaching? What distinguishes the one that you talked about? Go ahead.
I was going to say with ACE, there's PACES.
So you had ACE also? Mm-hmm. So there was?
There was PACES and ACE.
Do you know what PACE stands for? I don't. What does PACE stand for?
It stands for PAC, Accelerated Education.
No, but PACE stands for something.
It stands for PAC. That's literally what it says.
Really?
No, you get a pack of PACES.
That's what it stands for. I had an ACE rep tell me that
Okay.
one time because I was like.
Because I thought when Dr. Johnson was here, he was like, blah, 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 and I thought, oh, I think the first letters of those words was PACE. Anyway, that's fine. What's the idea with what's the idea with ACE education? You get PACES. How many had an ACE type education? Ish. Okay. All right. Alpha and Omega, did you do that online?
No, we had CDs that we used on the computer.
But it was computerized.
We did do some, but
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So for the rest of you, uninitiated, and I've never done it, but I've seen it. PACES or ACE says that generally students learn individually. They learn on their own. They receive a pack of PACES, and this PACE has information in it. It has problems or questions or whatever in it, and they work their way through it. I don't know the technicalities of this, so I might be, but somewhere along the line there's quizzes that they do or some type of testing that they do without looking at their work, and then there's tests that they do without looking at the information, and then they proceed through the you can do ACE education. I don't know when it starts, because I know they have like a kindergarten program, but that involves a teacher, I'm pretty sure. But at some point, you can have just an administrator or a supervisor, and they will answer questions or whatever, but you can learn on your own all the way through high school. And it's a very good program, okay? And I want to say that. There are definite shortcomings with it, though, okay? And actually, I have, two guys that are part of, that had it, shake their head like this. So rather than me blast ACE, and I don't want you just to trash your education, but what would be a shortcoming? Rather than have them do it, if you're thinking about ACE, what would be the difficulty that a student would have, or what would be a shortcoming from that style of education? And let's not have somebody that's been involved in it offer something. That looks like a hand, like with an idea, maybe.
If you're not a self-motivated person to have to do it on your own, I mean, yes, there's an administrator, but they can't always keep on top of you.
Okay, so a student has to kind of develop some self-motivation, right? Do they help with that? Does ACE education help with that? Yes and no. How do they try to motivate students to proceed, to go further? The star chart. Yeah. And at a certain point, that's very useful, I'm sure. But probably in a certain grade, or at some point in the time, your star chart is just like not the thing that you want to have your picture taken next to. When Dr. Johnson was here this time? Yeah, this time, because we didn't have it. He wanted to go in there and see our room, and then he wanted all the kids there to sit there in their office. Is that what it is? Sitting in their office and get a picture of them by their star chart. And they're mostly younger students, and they were all over that. But I can imagine being in 11th grade saying, okay, get my stars on the chart. But probably, hopefully by 11th grade, you have a little more internal motivation to do it. Okay, so there is the self-motivation thing for sure, but the program works with trying to motivate also. Go ahead, now someone with experience.
We also had goal cards.
Goal cards.
And we write our goals for each subject during the week with how many pages we wanted to do or whatever. And then in my case, most of the time my mom would look at our goal chart, our goal card, and then she would look at our paces and see if we made it.
See if you made your goal.
Yeah. So
So it's teaching you to set goals and achieve them. And obviously, every education needs somebody overseeing it. So if ACE is done in a poor fashion, I would say a fair amount of that reflects on the people that are administrating it. Okay. So, but it's a very useful program. I would say this, especially if you're in a small situation and you want to provide Christian education for people, it's probably the best, or it's the most used, and it's a very good program to get things started. What if you have 4 students? One's in 1st grade, one's in 4th grade, 7th grade, and 10th grade. One teacher, it can be done. Parents have done that, I'm sure. Homeschooling parents do that. But they use tools, and ACE is a tool that can be used in that situation. And if you're in a church and all those kids are from 4 different families, you're not going to be homeschooling them. Your church feels like, and I believe rightly so, churches should provide Christian education as soon as they can. Then that's a really good tool to use. Any other shortcomings with it? that you perceive? Okay, go ahead. You already spoke. You can go ahead.
Not from experience really, but I watched other kids cheat.
It is, as long as the system is not worked correctly, and probably times when it is worked correctly, there's like the way it works, I don't know if I should call it a temptation, because we shouldn't set temptations in front of people, but there's kind of a temptation. There's an easy way to slip the system, which is something like when you do your self-test, you don't study or something, and you do the self-test, you see what the answers are, and then you go back and you take the real test, and you already know what the answers are, because something like that has to do with the self-test, is one of the big places where cheating can take place. Is that right? Yeah. So you all should be very impressed with me for having never sat in an office, and I don't think I've ever even opened a PACE. I have talked to a lot of people about it, but I will say, if you know that, you can prevent it. Okay? And I've talked to people who would you say, I know who I would say. Let me just put it this way, rather than make you. How many of you would think that Dr. Mitchell is quite a very educated man, and probably was quite educated, a real astute academically, before he even came to college? He had ACE education. Okay, so I want to be careful. All of these systems have shortcomings. It's easier, I would say, to point them out with ACE. But if you work the system right, and I've talked to his pastor about ACE, and he's like, well, yeah, there's problems, but if you do it, you do it the right way, it's an excellent program, and it is. So, one thing I would say that I notice is that students that are in, that there's no, as far as I know, there's not many, I don't know of any. There might be some college classes, but there's no college degrees that you can get through ACE type training. So what that means is somebody graduates from an ACE school, and if they want to go to college, all of a sudden they're in a very different environment. I'm not handing out PACEs. I'm just standing up here talking. And the things I talk about, you're responsible for. So a lot of ACE students have had a hard time with a classroom situation with lectures. And some of them have a hard time with writing papers, presenting papers and stuff. I'm sure that you're taught to write grammar and composition and stuff like that, but grading that has to be a lot harder. I mean, you can't, subjective grading, how's that done by a PACE? The supervisor has to do that, and if a supervisor is very busy or whatever, then less subjective grading, where you're writing several sentences and expressing your thoughts, is being done. And hopefully but I'm sure there are ways to help with that. But formatting a paper is, like, most people don't even understand what that means, coming from that situation. Is that the end of the world? No. You know, if you have good ideas, it doesn't really matter if they're formatted, you know, if you have 1-inch margins or 2-inch margins on your paper. At the same time, you know, school is about developing discipline, and even having discipline in the way you format your papers, that it's always in a certain way. So, okay, so that's ACE. That's enough about that. Alpha and Omega, if I'm thinking right, is based on a lot of the same type of system as School of Tomorrow, ACE. Does that sound familiar? That you would, with books and stuff? Yes. So I'm not going to address that. Their perspective, I would say, and nobody's going to like the characterizations I'm going to make today. No publisher, like if I had all the publishing representatives here, they wouldn't like these characterizations. But I would compare ACE with, in this, they have this distinction of the book type things, and Alpha and Omega is this way. Alpha and Omega is moving online quicker than ACE. but I would put them kind of ACE and Abeka is similar, and BJ and Alpha and Omega are similar. Okay? Not completely, but I would just say the distinction between Abeka and BJ is similar to the distinction between Alpha and Omega and ACE. Okay? So now, I've just said there's a distinction between Abeka and BJ. Some of you have experienced both of them. Can you tell me what you think is the difference between them? And all this really is important for each of you to understand. You're either going to have to make a choice when you school your own children about what publisher to use. You might not have a choice in what you use if you're just a teacher, but after you use it, you very well would have input into how this is working, and maybe we should look at this one. You want to be able to recognize differences. You'd have possibly, I would say more hopefully, 2 or 3 different curricular resources from different publishers for you to look in for ideas. Even if all your kids have one, you have some others to look at. Okay. So now you've only experienced the difference. Can you tell me, did you notice any difference between the types of schooling that you got from Abeka and Bob Jones? How many had both? Or how many realized that they had both? You might not even know. Okay. All right, so it seems like this side of the room. Can you think of anything different between them? Sarah O?
I remember when I had English, this was homeschooling.
Uh-huh.
My mom.
You had English with Abeka. Okay.
Because the Bob Jones, I think it was the Bob Jones, they didn't really do research papers, and it was just a different system. So she
Mhm.
had the fact to do more research papers, so that's what we did.
Okay. All right. So, any other on that? Or okay. So Bob Jones' focus there, and it's funny, there's just slightly different things. Your Abeka grammar book is called Grammar and Composition. Your Bob Jones book is called Writing and Grammar. And that's a huge difference. You don't notice it. You think, oh, that's it. They just had to name it different so that it wouldn't be confused with the other guys. But Abeka's focus is grammar. All the facts and stuff of grammar, and they also tell you how to compose things. And when they teach you how to compose things, they're very concerned with factual things like research, have to have note cards, and all of that type of thing. Bob Jones is more concerned about writing. They want to encourage they want to encourage people to be able to write more easily and more beautifully, or whatever you want to say. They're not so concerned about the format of the writing. They want you to become a writer. That's big picture. And in order to do that, you have to know your grammar and all that. But there's 2 clear differences there. And I wouldn't say that I know Bob Jones because that's where I got my education. So I know they're like, we want them to be writers. I know Becca because that's what I had all the way through school. And it's just like rule after rule after rule, exercise after, underline 1 time, underline 2 times, draw an arrow, blah, blah, blah. And both are good at what they're doing, but they're trying to do different things. So you have a choice. What do you think is important? Not what did you have, and I'm not trying to disparage Sarah's mom, but when Sarah is married and has her own children, she'll have to decide, what do I want my children to know how to do? Is it important that they know how to write? Or is it important, what do I think is the best for my kids? Okay? And of course, her own education is going to influence that decision. But if she has kids, her husband is going to influence that decision too. And their thoughts about what they think their children are going to be good at, or how they want to prepare them, what they think is real important for the kids. And as much as I think research papers are important, I don't think they're as important as being able to write well. Nobody tests my sermons. Nobody checks my note cards. You know, for anything that I do, even if I write an article for the fundamentalist, always abounding, whatever thingamajig, it's much better if I can write a good article. It doesn't matter to anybody. Or maybe it matters to 3 people that get it, how many footnotes I have. And if they're accurately, you know, okay? So that's where, for me, that's the way I would make that decision. I don't have to make that decision, but that's the way I would make that decision. Anybody else? Okay, so Sarah offered one difference, grammar and the choice that her mom made. And please, I'm not saying that Mrs. Olson made the wrong choice. She made the same choice that I experienced all the way through. I had Becca all the way through, and I hate writing. So I'm a little bit bitter toward Becca. I wish I could just write more easily. I know exactly where my subjects and predicates and all of that stuff should be. I know exactly the form of the paper and all that. And the other system, it could just be me. It could be neither of their faults about, you know, why it's hard for me to write. But since it is hard for me to write, it must be, it can't be me. It has to be who I was taught by and the system that I used. Yes?
What do you think the purpose of them, putting so much emphasis on like sentence diagramming and stuff is? Because I understand you need to know the basics, noun, verb, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's, I think back, nobody's ever asked me to break down a sentence and all these things and draw arrows and prompts
Yeah.
and everything else.
Well, I think they overdo it to a point. But what I really think is that everything that they do in 12 years, they could do in 8 or 9 years. So if I were designing it, I would not take any of it out. I would just cram it into a shorter number of years. Because once you get to 8th and 9th grade, you pretty much know all. My 9th, I don't remember learning a thing about grammar since 9th, 10th, probably 9th grade seemed like it was all that. And after that, it was just like, let's do it all again. And let's do it all again. Now, a defense for diagramming. Diagramming shows you a picture of the relationship between the words in a sentence. And if you want to, I don't do this every time I preach a message. But if I get a passage, I'm saying, what does this mean? And I can't just easily figure it out. And I can easily figure out a lot of sentences because I can diagram and have diagrammed often. But if I can't figure it out, I have to step back and say, what's the subject of this sentence? And some of Paul's sentences that are 9 verses long are hard to figure out what the subject is. So then you break it into its clauses and all of that kind of thing. And then you say, what clause is this? What is this clause supporting, or where does it go? I have diagrams of sentences in Colossians that are huge. But what that sentence does is tell me what Paul's talking about. It clears my whole mind up on it. So diagramming is very powerful and a very useful tool. But doing the same amount of work, it's almost like, I don't know if somebody sat back and made this decision. I hate them if they did. It's like, we could teach everything in 10th grade, but let's leave out 2 things so that we can add 1 in 11th grade and add 1 more in 12th grade, and then we'll have a 12-year program. Okay? So, and in the old days, you learned your grammar, you learned it good and hard, you even parsed, which is actually verbally describing what's going on in a sentence, where a diagram is visually describing what's going on in a sentence. It's basically the same thing. And I think parsing went by the way because the visual is almost as powerful, and both are hard, so let's just do one. I don't know. But either way. But in the old days, you'd learn your grammar real well, and then you'd make a hard transition, Well, you'd been writing along the way, but you'd spend your last 3 years really working on developing your writing skills. If you knew your grammar well, all your writing would be formed correctly, or formulated correctly. And if you didn't formulate it correctly, you'd get knocked hard for bad grammar. So there in the English, that's a big difference between the two, and that's an example of the difference even between the publishers. We need to move along, so I'm just going to tell you the difference between the publishers. Abeka's from the outside, not being inside and knowing, and I don't even know if they, well, actually you can read some of their stuff. Abeka's thing is that Abeka is very knowledge-based education. I'm not saying that everybody who has Abeka education, and in fact, I don't believe I had any Bob Jones Press textbooks from 7th through 12th grade. But, so a side note, who cares about what the book is if you have a good teacher? A good teacher can take any book, and a good teacher can take a book written by an atheist, okay, and use it well, right? He has a lot easier job if it's written by a Christian, but the teacher makes a huge difference, which is the difference between your ACE type education and your classroom education. And whether it's home ACE and home classroom, or church ACE and church classroom, either way, there's a big difference between it, and the teacher makes a big difference. But, so Abeka is very much facts, memory. Just, and the example we can use is the one that we're already doing, the grammar. Okay, you kill us with grammar. Okay, there comes a point when we want to do more than grammar, because we're wired that way. God wired us to move out of grammar into seeing the relationships, and that would be your diagramming, but then into wanting to create things. And the creative juices, even if we're embarrassed to get up in front of people, our creative juices are going by about 10th grade. So in grammar, you'd want to get your grammar hard, and then your diagramming and relationships between all those sentences till about 8th or 9th grade, and then you want to say, now let's make stuff with this. Along the way, you're making a little book report that follows a very specific form, but as you get older, let's make stuff with this. Let's make book reports and present them on paper, present them in front of people, all different types of things. And that I'm talking about, those 3 stages, we've talked about basically all semester. That's our psychology. It's not really psychology though. Knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Grammar, logic, rhetoric. Pert, poet from the Lost Tools of Learning. It's why do we see that? Because that's the way God made us. Okay. But anyway, and Bob Jones is going to be more on the comprehension and concepts. Okay. Now, when Bob Jones started, they were big time comprehension and concepts. And you know what was wrong with it? Anybody have Bob Jones stuff? How long?
All the way through.
All the way through. Did your teachers add anything to your curriculum?
What do you mean?
Like worksheets, like in math and English? Outside of what was there?
Not really.
Not really? Okay. Most teachers or most schools feel or felt that there was not enough exercise, especially in the elementary math and stuff, because they were trying to teach these concepts, and they weren't like Algebra 2 concepts, but they were teaching the concepts of what's going on in the math, and they figured if you got the concepts, you got it. And they their shortcoming is that they didn't give enough exercises. What most people felt like students, if they just had some more just dry exercises, they would do better at the math and English in the younger years. Did you have it all the way through, as like first grade through? Okay, all right. So, and this that I'm telling you is stuff that Bob Jones admits themselves. They're like, yeah, our first editions, we were like way too much on the conceptual side of things and not enough drill. And everybody complains about Abeka is that all they do is drill, and you don't really get many concepts. You got rules and drill, but nothing like why this rule exists, or no concepts. So this is a real general caricature, but you have Abeka is facts with no explanation. Bob Jones is all explanation with no drill. You know, you just learn it, and if you learn it, you got it. You don't need the practice. Now that's a caricature, and second editions, and actually what we see, second edition. If this is first editions, second editions are here. Third editions are here. They're not ever going to be like this, because there is a definite philosophical difference on what we're doing in education. Abeka is give them the facts, they'll figure it out. It'll come together as they get older. And Bob Jones is like, we want them to know why, basically. Okay, that's going to be, again, maybe even that is still a little bit of a caricature, but that's going to be what I would say is the difference between them. Okay, so then there's Bob Jones, Abeka, ACE idea, and then there's classical education. We should address this. Anybody in here have a classical education? No. I don't have anybody with a classical education this year. Classical education looks back at what they did in classic ages. It looks at what's going on now and saying, this is not doing it. All of our modern inventions of the last 150 years have not helped. We've got lots of information, knowledge is increasing, but people don't know how to think with what they have. 300 years ago, 1,500 years ago, those educators taught people how to think. What was the system, or what was the idea in the way that they taught? And they look back there and they say, let's try to do that today still. Let me just, something else, and this I've been reminded in my head 3 times of this already. All of this, it does matter and it helps, okay? But what are we doing when we educate? And if you weren't here last semester, you're not going to even remember what I said, because you weren't here to hear me say it. But the class, the math class or the whatever, all those classes are just tools for us to accomplish our purpose. Okay, our purpose is to glorify God and spread the gospel, proclaim the gospel. Glorifying God means we need to learn about His creation. And so we need to learn mathematics and science and all that to be able to do that. Proclaiming the gospel, mathematics and science is connected to that, but more easily, our grammar and our speech is much more related to the idea of proclaiming the gospel, right? So, but even the subjects, we're not in school to learn a subject. We're not in school to become classically educated or to become conceptually educated or to become factually educated or to become whatever. The curriculum is not the purpose. It's a tool that helps us accomplish our purpose. And that's why the teacher or all of those things make in the big picture a bigger difference. But you have to know what your tools are and how your tools are designed so that when you use them, you modify this one a little bit. You're going to modify all of them. You want to know how to modify them. And classical education then takes and says, okay, students, there's 6, 7, 8 different branches of classical education, but the one that you would become most familiar with if you wanted to do it would be classical Christian education. And it's going to say students are memorizers when they're young. So let's go with that. You know, let the third grade class memorize 12 facts about every state in the Union, you know, in their geography class. And then Indiana, state song, state bird, you know, founding date, blah, 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 all kinds of stuff. And they'll do a sound off, and they just pop around the room. I've seen this. And I was in a school in March, and they had 37 states, and each person had their little bit of information that they had to remember that came at a certain time. But you know, everybody knew what everyone else was going to say. So the idea is that kids need to memorize. Let's make it enjoyable. I think kids in our school enjoy memorizing, but when I walk down the hallways, I hear a lot of the same ways to do things. Our teachers grow. If we can find even more and more and more varieties of ways to learn straight facts and information. That's what classical education is going to focus on, and they're going to teach Latin begin teaching Latin in 3rd and 4th grade. It doesn't make sense to us, but Latin is a dead language and it's very precise. So you have your prefixes, they always mean the same thing. You have suffixes, you have root words, and another defense. So it helps with this memory and it helps lay the foundation for later things. And about 70% of the words that we use in everyday language is based in some way on Latin words. So it turns out to be very helpful. Then in your middle school years, you're going to begin teaching the connections between all that stuff that they learned before, the relationships between them, whether it's historical cause and effect, whether it's timeline stuff, how far apart were certain things in history, whether it's diagramming. You know, you learned your parts of speech. Now we're going to put them and see the relationship of the parts of a speech or parts of a sentence, all of that type of thing. All your subjects in 6th, 7th, 8th, beginning in 9th grade, you're going to be learning the relationships between things. And a classical school is going to teach a separate class on logic, where they learn the actual, I forget what they're called, but the syllogisms and all of what is a faulty logical argument, what is a good logical argument. We make faulty logical arguments all the time. Sometimes we do it on purpose to be funny. You know, a lot of humor is based on a faulty logical argument, but a lot of accusations and a lot of evil is based on faulty logical arguments too. And being able to recognize them is helpful. I don't even know what they're called. You know, I've heard of an ad hominem. You know what an ad hominem is? Okay. So if I make a statement, I say, I believe this, and somebody attacks me and says, well, who are you? You're just a jerk. That's ad hominem. They didn't attack what I said. They didn't say whether what I said was true or false. They didn't say why what I said isn't true or anything like that. They just said, oh, yeah, and you like Burger King. You know, dumb argument, but it works. But if a lot of people had logic, it would work less. Anyway, and then in the upper grades, you're going to be taking all those relationships and turning them into ways to be creative with them. Writing papers, doing experiments, speeches, the creative type things. And in a classical Christian school, you're going to have at least a year, probably 2 years of formal rhetoric in 11th and 12th grade. It's the culmination of everything being brought together. And then there is and if you're going to do that type of education as an administrator, you're going to get your resources from a variety of different places. Okay? And then there's always self. Okay? Homeschoolers are almost all self. I mean, I've been to a couple of homeschool conferences, and they are like, there's 50 million publishers. 49 million publishers. And they all have their unique way that they're doing things. And homeschool parents, they go and they talk to all these people. And you know, it's like, how many of you are homeschooled? I don't want to disparage your parents if they were this way. So everybody, hands in your lap. But some homeschool parents, every year they go to a conference, okay, we're going with this. So they, like, some homeschool students had 6 different curriculums of math because mom went to a conference and talked to so-and-so, and this is the way to do it. Well, they did it for a year, and it was harder than the person who was in the booth talking about how easy it is. It was harder than that. And so then they went to another homeschooling conference, and they talked to somebody else. It says, yeah, we're using Math UC right now, and but ours is like that, but it's even better because it does this, 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 and this, and then, okay, so yeah, let's do that. So homeschoolers are known as probably a generalization. I don't think it's a caricature. A generalization of having different curriculums every year. But if you're on your own, you may say, I like this about this publisher, but I like this about this publisher. I think this trait about this publisher is important in this subject, but it's not as important in this subject. Or this trait about this publisher is important at this time in my student's life, but once they get to be this age, I want more of this kind of an emphasis. Okay? So parents and even administrators are evaluating, saying, how can we use the resources that are out there to create the best curriculum, 1st through 12th grade, including all the subjects and all that, for our students or for my children. Okay? And so these things about the publishers are important. Let's say you understand that and you say, okay, all right, I'm on my own. I'm going to make choices about every year. What should I teach? Okay. If you're going with Becca's history, you can kind of sit back and say, well, as long as I'm doing their history from 3rd grade through 12th grade, they're probably learning what most people would think students should learn in those years. But if you're saying, okay, I'm on my own, I'm going to choose this, and then I'm going to choose here and this, how will you make sure, or what should you, as far as in common understanding, what should you make sure your children are getting between in your 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade years, or in your 7th through 12th grade years? Do you understand my question? Okay. What do you think? Let's take the subject of history. Just give me one.
If you're teaching history this year and you use a different curriculum next year, you probably have to make sure that it's not teaching the same thing over.
Right, that's my point with the question. If I'm using Bob Jones, and I don't know this, I'm just making this up. Bob Jones says 9th graders need to learn, what's a historical subject? What? World history. Okay? And Becca says 10th graders need to learn world history. But I'm thinking my 9th graders I really want my 10th graders going with let's reverse it. Let's say I want my 10th graders going with the Bob Jones history and but in 9th grade or up through 9th grade, Becca, how do I make sure, or what do I need to make sure I don't repeat, or what do I need to make sure that they get in those 4 years? So we have said world history. That's a good subject to get. What's another one? American history. You got that American history right there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. You like a certain part of American history, right? Like 1984, 85, 86, something like that? That's a great part of American history and Grenadian history. So world history, American history, what else? What are normal subjects? Go ahead. Geography, okay? Should we spend a whole year on geography? No, please no. Okay. Sarah? Okay. Heather? What was that? Did you guys have a whole year of geography? How was it? How did it seem like forever? Why not?
Every day was something different.
Okay, what kind of geography was it? Was it just straight geography? All like water and dirt? Geography, of course, includes culture, right? Okay. Did it have any narrowing focus to it? Or did certain parts of it? Or did you just start with U.S., America, and then South America, and then Europe, and you just worked your way around the globe?
I think so.
Think so? Okay. All right. That's fine. Just curious. A whole year of geography. There's plenty of stuff there. I could spend 2 or 3 years on just Bible geography. So, okay, so geography. What's another subject in your histories?
Ancient history.
Ancient history is normally would be part of your world history. Normally, world history would mean going back to the beginning of the world, and includes ancient.
Some schools lump civics and government and economics and those kind of things in with history.
Right, but you'd have government, economics, and civics, which our students have never had civics. Okay, I never had civics, but civics is well worth teaching. Okay, so now what else is there? State history. Ensemble members are going to leave, that's fine. State history. In America, almost all states are like, you should be teaching state history in 8th grade, 4th grade and 8th grade or something like that. And in a certain sense, state history is good. In another sense, it's like, people move from state to state to state. What difference does it make? Part of me says, it's interesting to know. Another part of me says, it's a tool. It's not the whole purpose of school isn't the subject. So if we have state history in 8th grade, it's a tool. We can do state history, okay? But, so we've named a whole bunch of subjects. Go ahead.
Like church history.
Church history, yes. We probably wouldn't get that in high school. Or if we did, it might be in the Bible curriculum.
I was thinking more like the Reformation.
Reformation?
Things like that. That would kind of probably go more
With world history, yeah. Okay. So, but there's a lot of subjects there. And the decision needs to be made, when? I had economics in 9th grade. That was a really, really hard class. It was a book that was like published in 1950. So it just expected students to be a little bit smarter than all of us were. And it was a hard class. I'm glad I had like my second favorite teacher of all time as the teacher. But it was a real hard class for 9th graders. Probably is not a good choice. I mean, it was like, okay, next time we do this, we're making sure that's in 11th or 12th grade if we're combining classes or, whatever. Same with government. Okay? I had government in 8th grade and then I don't know when. But a lot of times you'll have government in 8th grade, but the government in 8th grade is more kind of just factual introduction, how a bill becomes a law. Have Mr. Bill that's going from house to house and all that kind of thing. And the different types of governments, memory type thing, like we have monarchies and limited monarchies and totalitarian governments and all of that type of thing. But how government really works and the scriptural basis for it and how we should think governmentally and all of that is way too heavy for 8th grade, right? So this has been a very enjoyable time. So I'm going to write down the stuff I wanted to tell you. You won't, look, you might not be tested on it. The test, you will be tested on the second topic that I wanted to talk about, and I'll make sure we talk about it because it's important. But we're done with one topic. I didn't cover all the subjects, but what I will do is I'll just write down a list of subjects that is generally accepted that you should have in your history program and your math program. Like normally you have a basic math or something like that, and then a pre-algebra, and then algebra, and algebra 2, and geometry, and then, if you're interested in this, and this is going to sound contradictory, but almost every state in the Union has state standards of what should be taught. Indiana has something they call the Core 40, the Core 40 or the Core 40 Plus or something like that. And they say these subjects have to be taught in order for state universities to accept your diploma into school. And at that level of just these are the subjects, not, I mean, they have state standards for what should be taught through the year, but at the level of these are the subjects that should be taught, state is, we're still kind of generally, human beings would agree on most of the stuff that, and you'd look at that and say, yeah, that's probably a pretty good idea. So that can be a very helpful resource. But thinking through when, that's part of something that you hopefully would do, but obviously sometimes it doesn't get done, or maybe in my situation, it's just something that had to be done, you know, and end up with economics in 9th grade. It was just really rough. I can't remember if at that time we were like everybody, like 9th through, no, it wasn't that way because it was just 9th and 10th grade. But even in our Bible program, we, at a certain point in our development of our curriculum, went to saying, well, Bible isn't very much grade specific. So we had our 4 years of Bible, and we had them all in one class. Because we thought it's not very grade specific. But when after a year or two of that, we realized that it's not grade specific, but there's a vast difference between a 9th grader and a 12th grader. So what a 11th and a 12th grader could understand and talk about Bible doctrines was different than what a 9th and 10th grader could understand and talk about with Bible doctrines. And so our education wasn't really, it was, you put it in the middle and it's too much for a 9th grader and not enough for a 12th grader. If you can have 1 grade per class, that's even better. But 2 grades per class is workable. But 4 grades per class is very difficult because even, you know, especially the younger they get, the more different distance there is between what they've learned in a year and what they can understand. But even in the last 4 years of high school, there's a big difference between what you can teach to a 10th grader compared with a 12th grader. All right. I'll get this together. It's just a list of subjects, and I might even look up. I think I will look up the link to what Indiana says you need for a high school diploma. It'd just be interesting to look at.